And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends. Happy Monday. Hope you had a great Easter or start of the Passover season. Welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and our brand new backdrop is here today. So great to be with you. Very excited. And I always love starting a Monday hearing that incredible voice of the great Biff Gore, who was on The Voice Season 6. And just a phenomenal guy. We wrote this song together. Yours truly, of course, on the harmonica. You gotta love creative, original intro song, theme song to a show that focuses, well, it's right here where we're at. Jimmy at the Crossroads is where politics and economics collide. We're always trying to make sense out of nonsense and bring you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, in partnership with the esteemed Washington Examiner. So great to be with you once again. I hope that you had a great holiday weekend. If you want to be a part of the festivities, you are more than welcome to join in. You can tweet at me 24/7, 365 at Sang Center. As the lower third shows, it's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also log on to my website, jimmysangenberger.com. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. So be sure, please, to join into the conversation if you feel so inclined. Also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You just go to youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Subscribe there, and you can watch all the videos that we put up day in and day out, including the live streams. And if you haven't liked the page on Facebook, look up Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality or Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. Like us on Facebook, you will be able to watch the live show as it happens and catch up on videos and other content as well. And be sure to follow our partners at the Washington Examiner. Like them on Facebook as well as on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. So great show for you today. Starting a little bit later than normal, but in a moment we will be joined by Michael Hiltzik, columnist at the Los Angeles Times. Always like a good conversation with Michael. And we will talk a little bit later with former U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, who will join us to talk about the oil situation in the Middle East, what we've seen with now this deal reached over the weekend on oil production, and slowing that down among the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, as well as some of the other Middle Eastern dynamics. He's a fascinating guy and has tremendous, tremendous insights on what's happening in the Middle East. I know few people who have the depth of knowledge and understanding as former Ambassador Zakhem. Plus, we will talk a little bit about higher education costs, Joe Biden's plan to address that now, and the student loan issue, as well as the prospect for sports opening back up with producer extraordinaire Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic every day. But without further ado, let's jump to our first guest of the day. Michael Hiltzik is a columnist at the Los Angeles Times, and he joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads once again. Michael, welcome back, sir. Good to talk with you.
Good to be back.
Hey, I'm liking the hat. Good setup for today. Having a little fun on a Monday.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to hide the fact that I haven't had a haircut in about 2 months now. Unlike you, apparently.
Well, in my case, see, I had a feeling that we weren't going to be able to get haircuts for very long. And so some point last month, I got my haircut. And then within a week, everything was, the notice came down, you can't hold open these salons and so forth. So I was like, thanking God that I thought, hey, I need to get my hair cut now instead of waiting later. So I got it a few, 3-4 weeks ago, but I missed got in advance rather of the shutdown of hair salons. So I lucked out that way. All right, well, how are you doing right now, Michael, amidst all of the craziness with the coronavirus, the shutdowns, all those things?
I'm doing fine. We're all doing fine in this house, but I work from home normally, so it's not much of a change for me, except that I'm busier than I've been in years. So.
Sure. Well, I can imagine. I've been seeing you've written quite a lot, and let's dive right into a big picture question. At this point in time, how do you think things are panning out as far as the coronavirus mitigation effort and all this talk of getting to a point where we are able to successfully, as the phrase goes, reopen the economy?
Well, in California, it's gone very well. I think the numbers tell the story that early action by our governor and many mayors has helped to flatten the curve, if not crush the curve. So we have, on a per capita basis, a lot fewer cases, certainly fewer deaths than in other communities, but our political leaders are making sure that they're not signaling that they're ready to reopen at this point, which I think is wise. So I think California communities will be very wary of premature resumption of the sorts of activities that could create a new wave. I think, what all the experts tell us, and I'm talking about epidemiological and medical experts, not political experts, is that we need much more thorough capacity for testing. We need a lot more tests. We need to be able to direct tests where there are suspicions of outbreaks. And it's going to be a while before the U.S. gets to that point because we've been so late in ramping up.
What do you think, though, Michael Hiltzik, about opening up certain states, certain parts of the country that really are not seeing, or that are seeing success in flattening the curve and slowing the spread of this virus? And I don't mean this month, but getting into May. Dr. Fauci, for example, has been talking even about his timeline goal. In fact, let's play cut 7. This is Dr. Fauci on CNN yesterday being asked about the possible timeline in his view.
Based on what you know right now, when do you think the country will be ready to take some of these steps to reopen based on the availability of testing? When do you see that happening?
Jake, that's a great question. And that's really what I was inferring when I said a rolling reentry. It is not going to be a light switch that we say, okay, it is now June, July, or whatever, click, the light switch goes back on. It's going to be depending where you are in the country, the nature of the outbreak that you've already experienced, and the threat of an outbreak that you may not have experienced. So it's going to having to look at the situation in different parts of the country. Obviously, New York, who went and is going through a terrible ordeal, is going to be very different from Arkansas, and you'll hear from the governor shortly, and very different maybe from some places on the West Coast, like Washington State, which have been successfully able to prevent that big spike. I think it's going to have to be something that is not one size fits all.
When do you think it could start?
You know, I think it could probably start, at least in some ways, maybe next month. And again, Jake, it's so difficult to make those kinds of predictions because they always get thrown back at you if it doesn't happen. Not by you, but by any of a number of people. We are hoping that at the end of the month we could look around and say, oh.
So I think, Michael, in essence, we could describe that as cautious optimism on the part of Dr. Fauci. What'd you make of that?
Well, I call it caution. I don't know if it's optimism. Look, I think the important clause or phrase that he used is, it depends. It depends on the availability of testing. It depends on what we've seen in terms of community spread. And I think the most important thing is that it's not up to the president to reopen the economy. It's much more up to governors and
Correct.
mayors to decide whether their communities are ready. But even beyond that, it really is up to consumers. And you have to look around and you have to say, well, how willing are consumers going to be to go back to concerts or ball games where they're sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers? How much more willing are they going to be to go to conferences and conventions and festivals, whether they're indoors or outdoors? And the answer is that's probably going to be slower than everything. And I think if you're a restaurant owner, you're going to be making the calculation about whether it's worth reopening at any point if you don't think the customers will come back in large.
Right.
And that's going to take longer than anything. So I'd say, yeah, we could start to step-by-step liberalizing of stay-at-home rules, at some point in May, but I think it's going to be much more like June, July, August, or even September when schools reopen before you see real signs that people are comfortable
Right.
being next to other strangers under any circumstance.
And I think it's an important point to say that at some juncture, hopefully the beginning of May, you will see states, as the phrase goes, reopening the economy and then leaving it up to the private business owners to determine, do they want the liability issues that could come up and so forth, and then also individuals to decide, do I want to go to a restaurant? Do I want to go to a baseball game or what have you as things open up increasingly? And I think that's good, where it then becomes the onus is back on to the individual and whether or not they feel comfortable. But I want to get to a couple of different issues that I know you've written about. One of them, President Trump has been lambasting the post office for the last couple of years, particularly because of Amazon and deals that they have with Amazon. And President Trump last week said, quote, "I'll tell you who's the demise of the post office," which is struggling right now amidst all of this. "It's these internet companies that give their stuff to the Postal Service. Packages." And he asserted that the Postal Service loses money, quote, "every time they deliver a package for Amazon or these other internet companies that deliver." Now, I looked into this a lot back previously, it was a year or two ago, when the president was lambasting the post office on the regular, it seemed, for their deal with Amazon that he considered some sort of a sweetheart deal. My research has shown me that packages have actually helped to save the post office, while mail itself, just regular first-class mail, was becoming a revenue loser. Talk to us about your thoughts on what I just said there, and then also the dynamics at play with President Trump and the Postal Service and what you've written about in the LA Times, Michael Hiltzik.
Yeah, well, I've done the same research that you've done, and I've come to the same finding, which is that, and I've characterized it, you could look at what Trump says and say, well, he's just ignorant. I think he's lying because he knows the truth. And if he doesn't know the truth, then he's deliberately not paying attention. The fact is, it's been it's been tested and examined and scrutinized. The Postal Service does not lose money from its contract with Amazon. In fact, as I pointed out the other day, Amazon, not only are packages, look, the Postal Service's revenue from packages is growing even as package volume itself has fallen. So that's sort of a double boon to the Postal Service. It's raising the rates on packages and parcels is not going to create a profit for the Postal Service because it's just too small of a share of its total volume and revenue. But yes, look, Amazon is very good at logistics. What it does is it sorts its packages before it brings them to the Postal Service. It makes sure they get to the Postal Service at the closest point to delivery that it can. So it's probably cheaper for the Postal Service to ship Amazon parcels than other shippers, whether we're talking about FedEx or DHL, where the Postal Service often provides the last mile and delivery for a price. Now, the fact of the matter is, as everybody knows who's paid any attention to this, is first of all, there's nothing in the rules and there's no sense in looking at the Postal Service as a service that should be profitable. That's not what it's about. It's a government service. It's there to do its job, whether it turns a profit per piece of mail or package or not. It's a public service. It's in the Constitution, as I've had to point out over and over again.
It's true, it is.
In Article 1 says, the government shall provide the Postal Service. We don't expect the roads to be profitable. We don't expect public schools to be profitable. They're public service, and they are government services because it's so hard and it doesn't make sense for them to turn a profit year by year. Now, added to that is this 2006 attack on the Postal
Looks like Michael Hiltzik, of course, we're talking with him via Skype, and occasionally you get some of these cutting in and out issues that might happen, so he's frozen up just a tad. We'll get to Michael Hiltzik in just a moment. Although one thing that I do want to clarify and bring this point up as we get Michael back on here on Jimmy at the Crossroads is that the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, enlisting the enumerated powers of Congress under the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 doesn't actually say shall. So this is one point. As soon as we get Michael back, I want to talk with him about. It says that they have the power to establish post offices and post roads, which, there we go. It looks like we have Michael, so we're getting him queued up back into the software program here on Jimmy at the Crossroads again. Michael Hiltzik is a columnist at the Los Angeles Times. And Michael, I just wanted to double check my recollection. You said that the United States shall have a post office or postal service is stated in the Constitution. Under Article 1, Section 8, in the enumerated powers, it says the Congress has the power to establish post offices and post roads. It doesn't say that it shall or that it needs to. The authority is given, absolutely. So I have no question on that. It is there, and most Americans, I think, don't understand that that is the case. But I do think that is an important distinction, especially at another time we can get into this. I'm a believer in phasing out the public role of the post office and privatizing the institution, but I think it is important to at least acknowledge it's created in the Constitution, but at the same time it's not mandated in the Constitution. But please go back to what you were saying.
Well, look, for the last 240 years or whatever, we've taken this as a government service. We know that the post office binds this country together. And by the way, I sort of look at this in terms of the liquor store analogy. I mean, why do liquor stores get regulatory relief from Congress and state legislatures? It's because every lawmaker has one in his district or her district, and that's true of post offices too. I mean, one of the things that Congress does more than anything else is pass resolutions naming local post offices after local luminaries. Anytime the Postal Service has talked about closing post offices or cutting back on service, there's been an uproar, a bipartisan uproar in Congress. We are just not a country that's geared to letting the Postal Service die. There's one person in the entire government who talks about letting the Postal Service die, and that's Trump, and he really should just shut up.
Well, let me say that in terms of the post office, one interesting paper that I read from a number of years ago, 2001, 2002, I'm in Colorado, our governor, Jared Polis, then wrote a paper for the Independence Institute, a think tank in Colorado, where he even suggested the idea of privatizing the post office, which I found interesting. But I would agree that the president is not presenting the facts when he's talking about the post office and packages. I mean, the packages are the only reason that the post office is in existence is because, like, is able to be in existence right now without constant bailout funds is because of packages. But Michael Hiltzik, I want to shift gears here. We saw the stock market rise last week despite the bad unemployment news that we were getting of millions of Americans out of work. Now we are in well beyond 10 million Americans who have filed unemployment claims. You had a piece for the Los Angeles Times on how the stock market was rising despite the awful unemployment news. Why do you think that was the case? What's your view on that?
I wrote last week in the wake of, first of all, the unemployment news and also the rise in the stock market, is that the stock market doesn't care about your feelings. That's not what it's all about. The stock market doesn't look at the present much, and it certainly doesn't look at the past. The stock market is designed to discount the future, and I think what we're seeing is that investors are beginning to think that we've repriced maybe a lengthy recession, and that when the stock market looks ahead, it looks ahead at the period when we will be out of the lockdown and out of the recession. And investors in the aggregate, and an investor, deals emotionally with his or her portfolio, but investors in the aggregate basically show a different phenomenon. But investors in the aggregate are looking ahead to the fact that we are going to get through this at some point. There's a debate as to when and to what degree, but that's what the market's looking at. The market isn't looking at today's or last week's or next week's unemployment figures. It knows, investors in the aggregate know they're going to be bad and know why they're going to be bad. And they're going to be bad because we've put the economy in a deep freeze for some period of time. Nobody seems to think that there's some sort of structural problem in the economy as there was in 2008 or in 1999 that justifies a major pullback. Mm-hmm. So, I think that the stock market is looking ahead, and it's saying that it's reached the point where it's discounted the prospect of an economic slowdown, and it's now looking at the beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I think that there will be another wave at some point where we will see stock market declines once you get earnings coming in, and not just earnings, and particularly second quarter earnings, so in a few months from now, not just earnings themselves, but what those earnings show, Michael Hiltzik, about the trajectory of these individual companies, their health, their ability to recover from the economic malaise that we're currently enduring. But there's a lot of talk going on in Washington, D.C. about the idea of a phase 4 deal, what needs to happen next. I am of the mindset where you can fund a little bit more to some of the existing programs. For example, I'm open to the idea of expanding funding for the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses to continue to be able to get loans from the Small Business Administration. But I'm not on board with the idea of adding new expansive programs or this and that in order to address this current situation. I think you can put some funding behind things that were already in the previous CARES Act, particularly the best provisions. But what do you think needs to happen from your standpoint, Michael Hiltzik?
Well, I think we need more. Basically, I think we need a much more secure much more secure coverage of income for people who've been furloughed or laid off. That might mean another stipend, like the $1,200 that's beginning to show up in people's bank accounts now. I think we should look at other countries that have gone through this. Denmark is often mentioned. Denmark is just covering 80% of the wages of workers who were exposed to job losses, so that their employers don't have to fire them. I think, yeah, that's a positive idea. We have the money to do that. We should do that to make sure that the job losses that we've seen over the last 3 weeks of unemployment reports don't persist beyond the point that they have to.
So in terms of expansions here, do you think there needs to be additional programs added on, or is it just funding more the things that Congress did in the CARES Act, such as the unemployment provisions you're talking about?
Well, we need more. I think we have to be ready to extend the unemployment provisions for at least another month, maybe 2 months. I think we need to do another stipend for adults and children, so that people have the money to pay their rent and buy food. I think we certainly need something in there that protects the election. The spectacle that we saw in Wisconsin of people having to line up personally, exposing themselves to sickness so that they could vote, that's appalling and it's disgusting. Yeah. And by the way, that's a Republican stunt. So that needs to be stopped. We need to make sure that people can vote by mail, vote remotely, the way Donald Trump votes remotely.
So let me jump in there, because
we need to take care of that.
Let's talk about the mail voting, because I had a couple of weeks ago former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams. I know California is one of the states that's been doing mail balloting. Here in Colorado, we were the third state after Oregon and Washington to take that step. And I'm actually, in the beginning, I had strong reservations. I think it's worked out well here in Colorado. And what I would say is, based on our experience in talking with experts such as former Secretary of State Wayne Williams and others who really know this stuff well, is that here in Colorado, it took about a decade for us to get to the point where people were even clamoring for mail balloting. And when we got to that particular point, we were ready for it as well, because the infrastructure was in place, we had the experience, we knew what needed to happen. There are a lot of challenges and issues that can come upon us when you're trying to implement a mail ballot system. And while I agree with you in theory that it would be good for all of these states to move to a mail ballot, and I say that as a conservative guy, I mean, I think and I'm talking with other Republican experts in Colorado that are dealing with election issues and have for many years, who agree with me that the president shouldn't be saying the things that he's saying about mail balloting, and Republicans around the country are getting it wrong. But in this point in time, election integrity and voter the security of the ballots is essential, and you need to make sure that if you're moving towards that system, that you do it right. And I just don't know that there are states around the country that are equipped to make that switch. And not only that, but we're seeing what's happening with ventilators and with other PPE that are needed for medical professionals across the country to deal with this crisis. There are only a few companies in the nation that are capable of doing the ballot printing, especially on a large scale. We don't want ballots to become the new ventilators, Michael Hiltzik. So I would like to see more of a switch to mail balloting. I just don't know how practical that is this year to do it in a massive scale.
Well, that's why we need Congress to step in, provide the funding to do it. There's no reason why it can't be done. Every state has a system of absentee balloting by mail. Nobody says that absentee ballots are any less secure or any less efficient or effective than having to go out and, you sign your name in front of 3 or 4 old ladies who have nothing better to do than to be election monitors. And by the way, there is going to be a clamor for this. Starting now. And we saw the clamor in
Michael Hiltzik, our guest from the LA Times, cutting in and out a little bit again there as we wrap up and wind down our conversation with him. See if we can give just a quick second. I think the rosier scenario that Michael seems to be painting here is a little bit untenable at this point in time. I don't see how that switch can be made even if you did have some sort of congressional action. I think the challenges are more difficult now. Encouraging it, I have no qualms with that if you can make that sort of a switch, but I think that there are difficulties in it. We do need to go to a break, though, so sorry to Michael Hiltzik for how we're ending our conversation with him here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, but he's always a fascinating guest giving us perspective from the left here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I have had many a spirited debate with Michael Hiltzik, and I look forward to more conversations down the line. I am Jimmy Sengenberger here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense and bring you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, day in and day out. When we come back, it looks like over the weekend there was a deal reached. United States, Saudi Arabia, and Russia all coming together and hashing out a deal they could move forward with on oil production. We will talk about that and some of the dynamics in the Middle East with former ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, who will be joining us by telephone when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't go anywhere. We've got so much coming up.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Attention! This is the automotive version of the National Census. To complete the National Census, simply speak into your radio in a loud, clear voice when you hear this sound. I will record your answer when you hear this sound. Okay, let's begin. What is your name? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Please speak louder. 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 All right, Mr. Fulton, how many people are in your automobile right now? Did you include the body in the trunk? I thought so. Now give me the correct number. Thank you, Mr. Fulton, for completing the National Census. Your results will be tabulated and added to the large pile of garbage floating in the Pacific Ocean. Thank you for taking part in the National Census.
Who's there? What do you want?
Hello, Donald Trump. It's me, the Easter Bunny.
Have a seat, have a seat. Have a seat so much. Do you remember, Easter Bunny, when I did you a huge favor by eliminating those horrible carrot tariffs?
Yeah.
Well, now guess what? You're going to do me a huge favor by doing your normal Easter Bunny thing, whatever that is. Running around the world, planting eggs in the ground. But America first, please.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, I hop around the world. I don't run. And second of all, I don't plant the eggs. I just hide them.
How do they come to full maturity then?
Well, you hard boil them.
That seems a little cruel to me. I don't,
Well, I'll tell you what you can do. Why don't you just pardon them like you do the Thanksgiving turkeys?
It's a different thing.
The third thing. How am I going to get around the world, Mr. President? The travel ban's in effect. There's TSA to worry about. I mean, I got to get...
Consider it done. Consider it done. I'm going to use the War Appropriations Act to commandeer Santa's sleigh.
Good idea.
And there's nothing he can do about it.
Well, he might not...
Oh, you're worried about his elves.
The elves, yeah.
Believe me, if they raise a stink, it's going to be boom, boom, out go their northern lights, believe me.
Oh, that seems kind of harsh.
Now, tell me something. When you hippity-hop out of your tomb...
that would be Jesus.
Every year. And you see your shadow?
That would be Puxatawny Phil, the gopher.
That means there's 6 more weeks of the quarantine, isn't that right?
That would be Dr. Fauci.
You know something very interesting? The Easter Bunny Most bunnies leave only white eggs.
There's only me.
And that's wrong. I'm the least egg-cis man you'll ever meet. This year we're going to have all the colors of the eggs everywhere, every stripe. A panoply, a panorama, a rainbow of colors.
Yeah.
I want it to look like Walt Disney himself threw up.
Thanks for that visual. I think I can make that happen. Let me call my peeps. We'll get around the world before you know it, and Easter Sunday's going to be great again. Oh, and this year, Mr. President,
yes,
just as a favor, I promise not to smoke all the Easter grass.
That's a very good.
That's a little joke I got from Colorado.
I'm going to tweet that one, actually.
I'm out of here.
I'm tweeting it right now. Here I am. Oh, by the way, when you get to heaven, say hi to Half and the bunnies for me, please.
I really don't think that's the way it works, Don Trump, but I'll see what I can do.
And folks, let's welcome back your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
All right, we are back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, working through some of those technical difficulties. Occasionally it happens, one thing or another. But welcome back. We're glad to be with you. Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. So without further ado, let's go to our guest, who should be on the line now. Okay, so I guess not quite yet. We will try one more time here, and I think there's just a little bit of confusion on his end in the process here, so we are getting that sorted out here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to be with you again. Our guest we're working on here is Ambassador Sam Zakhem, needing to join us on the phone. He is former ambassador to Bahrain, and he was ambassador to Bahrain under both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. So it is very fascinating when you look at the dynamics that have been happening in oil. It looks like we may have him there. Okay. I guess I see what's going on here. So we're having a little bit of confusion here. We're getting sorted out. So let me just talk about the news of the day and what we've got here with the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Russia agreeing to lead an unprecedented oil output deal, as the Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the U.S. have agreed to lead a multinational coalition in major oil production cuts after a drop in demand due to the coronavirus crisis and a month-long Saudi-Russian feud that had devastated oil prices. The deal, sealed Sunday, came after President Trump intervened to help resolve a Saudi-Mexico standoff that jeopardized the broader pact. What is it with the history, and I think in the Alamo there when we're talking about a standoff with Mexico and so forth. As part of the deal, 23 countries committed to collectively withhold 9.7 million barrels a day of oil from global markets. See, the big problem here, what we've been seeing with oil, has been that there has been a glut in production, where Saudi Arabia and Russia have consistently been increasing their production. They haven't been holding it back, yet at the same time, consumers have not been able to go out there and purchase oil. That is gasoline, because, well, technically they could, but they haven't been doing it so much because they've had to stay at homes. So it's been a double whammy, plus the coronavirus situation, all sorts of things happening that have been negatively impacting oil, but it looks like we have a deal that was reached. Ambassador Sam Zakhem, looks like we've got him. Ambassador, are you there, my friend?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad we got you here. So former ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, served both the Reagan and Bush administrations as ambassador to Bahrain. In addition, Ambassador Zakhem was called back to duty to help lead and spearhead the diplomatic effort in the first Gulf War at the request and behest of former President George H.W. Bush. And he joins us now. Ambassador, my friend, happy belated Easter to you. So great to be with you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Jimmy, anytime.
So, my friend, let me just ask you, because I was teeing up on the issue of oil. I mean, this is something that we have seen the dynamics change quite a bit as the United States has become increasingly a leading producer of oil on the world stage. We saw an agreement reached over the weekend, U.S., Saudi Arabia, Russia, deciding that they will slow down their production, which has been the glut in production, as I noted, has been really hammering U.S. oil producers. What do you make of it? What's your understanding of what happened, sir?
Well, the whole world would be better off. The producing nations, all of them, would be better off if the oil production falls down, because it's, as you say, it's a double whammy: the pandemic and the decreasing in the price of oil. The decrease in the price of oil, along with the pandemic, creates a double whammy for any nation producing oil. So it'll be great for OPEC and other producing nations to join together, along with Russia and Saudi Arabia, so that the oil prices would stabilize a little bit and hopefully will start going up, so that oil producing companies can stay in business rather than go bankrupt.
Ambassador, one thing that has been striking to me is the difference between how the United States operates in the oil and gas world and countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia do, in that they're basically state-owned industries in those countries, whereas in the United States it's privately owned, and private companies are able to make production decisions based on supply and demand. You don't see that in the same way from those other countries, do we?
You're right on. And they are actually responsive to the whims of the leadership in both countries. In our country, we have a free enterprise system. Each company decides what it wants to do, and the government does not control either the production or the price of oil or the refining of oil. But many of the refining companies are getting close to being bankrupt now.
Yeah, well, it is a case that this has put a real strain on American oil and gas producers, for example. Now, there has been discussion of whether the Saudi Arabian government in increasing their production previously and Russia doing the same, if it's just more of a spat between the two of them, or if those countries are trying to disadvantage, were trying to disadvantage American producers. Any thoughts on that, Ambassador Sam Zakhem?
Well, we are one of the top oil-producing nations in the world, and I don't trust Russia. And frankly, even though I know the people of Saudi Arabia and they've always been close friends of the United States, when it comes to each country's national interest, I don't trust either of the two nations doing what's right for us. So we have to do what's right for the United States of America and for the oil companies of our country.
Well, one thing that I think is very critical to keep in mind is that this deal happened over the weekend. Ambassador Zakhem, the United States, the Trump administration, leading Saudi Arabia and Russia to an agreement to reduce production of oil in their countries. And I think this is significant, particularly vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, because it underscores the influence that the Trump administration has been raising once again in the Middle East for the United States. That is to say, and you and I have talked about this many a time on the airwaves, is that the Obama administration really worked hard to build a strong relationship with Iran, but at the cost of a relationship with the Middle Eastern allies and countries that are in the region, such as Israel, such as Saudi Arabia. And when the Trump administration came into power, the president and his top advisors said, we need to move forward with a stronger relationship among these countries, in addition to saying no to Saudi Arabia, in addition to saying, no to Iran and in terms of getting out of the Iran nuclear deal as the Trump administration did. And these different policy changes have helped to build up more of an influence and sway of the United States in the Middle East with partners like Saudi Arabia, to the point where President Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and we hardly heard a peep from those countries, the Arab nations in the Middle East, about that.
Here. 3 years ago to the month, I was speaking in Abu Dhabi, and that's the year when President Trump was elected to office, and you should have heard the leadership there praising Mr. Trump and criticizing vehemently President Obama and his administration. You hit it right on the head, Jimmy. We rarely ever had been so much respected as we are now in the Arabian Gulf and in Israel and the whole Middle East. They love Mr. Trump. They trust Mr. Trump, and they have great respect for our country under his leadership. As you said, if they did not care for Mr. Trump, there would have been a great revolt against America when we recognized Jerusalem as the rightful capital of Israel, and especially when we gave the Golan Heights to Israel. Not even Syria objected.
It's so fascinating. Former Ambassador to Bahrain, Sam Zakhem, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Ambassador, going off of what you were just saying, my understanding of the region, especially in talking with you, are two things are very important to keep in mind. One is strength and respect. Those are critical in order to get these countries to take you seriously and to be willing to listen and maybe not throw a fit, so to speak, when you move the capital or recognize that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, or when you go to the table with them, you're actually able to bring a deal about when it comes to reducing oil production levels and so forth. That's one thing, strength and respect. Another thing that we're noticing, and that is important to keep in mind, is the idea of bad or worse. Look, you're going to have dictatorships in the Middle East, no matter what. You're going to have Arabic dictatorships in the Middle East, but the question is, are those countries more often than not advancing American interests, or are they constantly going against American interests? And Iran is an example of the latter, while Saudi Arabia would be the former, and that's critical to keep in mind.
You said it accurately. Yes, the fact that the Obama presidency was so pro-Iran and so anti-Arab, anti-Saudi, and anti-Arab Gulf, the GCC states depended on us so much militarily. And the Minister of Defense of Bahrain personally told me President Obama denied even the state of Bahrain that houses our Fifth Fleet, denied them the purchase of even ammunition for the M16 rifles that we had sold them. He said, now we have to use the Chinese and Russian guns because Obama would not sell us ammunition even. Obama was a fiasco for America's national interests as far as the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the 6 states in the Gulf, are concerned.
Yeah, it's so critical, too, to look at the economic plan, the path to prosperity plan, or rather peace to prosperity plan that the Trump administration has been moving forward with, because when we see the Middle East, you look at the region, and it has been very difficult economically. It relies so much on oil. You have a lot of poverty there. And the Trump administration has recognized, it seems to me, Ambassador Zakhem, that you need to improve the economic reality in the Middle East in order to bring about peace, because if you don't, then they're going to be just trying to scrape by as opposed to having something really to live for, which is a better life for themselves and for their families. And so as my friend Samuel Laurie has put it many a time, that when we see terrorism, we often see it really grow in areas of poverty. And if you can address that as well as the diplomatic side of things, you can help to bring about maybe not full peace, but at least a little bit of cessation of tensions and terrorism in the region.
Yes, very much so. And it did bring down the level of violence between Hamas and Israel. Unfortunately, it has not yet been implemented. Because I think of some erroneous politics or erroneous policies on the side mainly of the Palestinian Authority being pushed by Hamas not to accept this goodwill proposition by the administration of Mr. Trump, and that would very much alleviate the economic hardships that the Palestinian people are facing both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. I hope they will come to their senses on both sides and accept the proposal of Mr. Trump, because it will bring economic relief to those who need it the most, which are the Palestinian people in both the West Bank and Gaza, and it will bring peace to Israel.
Former Ambassador Sam Zakhem, before we let you go, I want to ask you one final question to kind of tie everything together, please. The significance of the oil deal we saw reach Trump administration with Saudi Arabia and Russia over the weekend, and also what we're talking about as far as the broader dynamics in the Middle East. How would you bring them all together in terms of a representation of how the Trump administration's Middle East policy has been conducted over the past 3.5 years or so?
I think it has been very creative, very constructive, and a policy that negated the horrible feelings that the Obama administration created in that region of the world. And as you eloquently stated, there was not even one finger raised against all the goodwill that Mr. Trump showed toward Israel. And this latest thing that Saudi listened to us and Russia listened to us in terms of decreasing the production of oil, that shows that really the Trump administration is doing a super job, particularly in the Middle East.
Very interesting points as always. Former Ambassador to Bahrain Sam Zakhem, thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing your insights here on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you.
Same here. The pleasure, in fact, is all mine. Again, former Ambassador Sam Zakhem joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Always a treat to talk with Ambassador Zakhem. His insights, his experience provide tremendous content for us to dive deep into here on the show. I'm sure he will be back in the future. Once again, you are watching Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, and doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will talk with Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush Magic, our producer extraordinaire, a little bit about the possible return now of the NBA, of course the MLB, looking at returning too, and one thing as well that has been a hot button for me. We'll talk about this a lot on Jimmy at the Crossroads in the future, I'm sure, and that is higher education costs. Joe Biden, Democratic nominee in waiting, is now talking more and more about student loan debt relief. But is his approach the right way to go? We'll talk about that more here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Stay tuned. We've got Magatol coming up.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you are allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol, from the makers of Triggerol.
Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next. I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy. Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
welcome back Mr. Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back. Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to be with you, rocking and rolling on this Monday, the 13th of April. Still a little bit more to talk about here on the show. Great to be with you. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also, like the show on Facebook, Jimmy Sengenberger, media personality. And be sure, please, to share the show as we are live and also the other videos if they catch your eye. Good to be with you. Always a pleasure and a privilege, in fact, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And I gotta say, it is just a treat to have now the brand new backdrop. Pretty excited to have it here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and once again coming to you in partnership with the esteemed Washington Examiner. A couple things we want to talk about here in the remaining moments of the show. The first thing is on the prospect for sports to return. That's what's so interesting. Baseball, it looks like increasingly is going to be coming back. It increasingly looks like it will be coming back, perhaps with two reorganized leagues in Arizona and in Florida, where the games would take place with select teams arranged anew for the league and how it would be structured. In addition, NBA. Is it possible that the NBA could return? Well, Mark Cuban, Mavericks owner, in Cut 4, was asked yesterday on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace about the possibility of the NBA coming back as well.
Do you think the NBA returns this season? How do you do that with social distancing? And could you envision a situation where everybody who comes in has to have their temperature taken?
Well, a couple questions there, Chris. Do I see us getting back to a season? I don't want to make any predictions, but I'm hopeful that we will. But I don't think we'll play in front of fans. I think initially we'll play just for the TV cameras with essential personnel and players. And I think that's a great thing because I think we need things to cheer for. We need teams to get excited about. We want a communal experience so we can all root for our favorite teams. That's going to be a big step. And I think the NBA recognizes that that's a responsibility we have and that we'll undertake as soon as it's safe because we won't do anything to jeopardize the safety of our players or employees. Now, part two to that, in terms of when do we get back to that sense of normalcy where we can all crowd into a stadium or an arena, once we have confidence in the medicine, then I think that's when it happens. When, again, American exceptionalism is outstanding. The scientists are going to come up with solutions. And when they do, and when we have that confidence, people will go back. We're already taking the precautions and already going through the process at the American Airlines Center to say, okay, what do we need to do in terms of sterilization, sanitization, repeat cleanings, in terms of informing people that, the seat that they're in has been cleaned, 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago, whatever it may be. And so we'll take those necessary steps. So once the science is in place and we start to feel confident, then the facilities and the arenas and stadiums, et cetera, will take the steps to make sure that it's clean. And then once we start going through, confidence will build.
It is, I think, really important to keep in mind that even if you can't go to a sports game and enjoy it in the crowd, being able to at least watch it on television and have some teams to root for, as Mark Cuban was pointing out, that is tremendous and I think would be a good moral uplift for the American people. Let's talk a little bit about that and then jump into higher education costs and student loan debt with the man who works the Matoush magic every day here on the show as our producer extraordinaire, Nathan Matoush, sports guy to be sure. Nathan, hello, my friend. Welcome back to the camera.
Jimmy Sengenberger, thanks once again. This is a great opportunity yet again.
Oh, as always, it really is a treat to have your thoughts, especially when we're talking about the issues of sports and more. So what do you make of it? MLB may come back next month. Arizona, Florida just rearranged leagues temporarily for this season. The NBA may come back in a couple of months. Both situations without fans in the crowd, fans in the stands. What do you make of it? What's your thought?
Well, I think it shows that there is light at the end of the tunnel of all this. When we know that sports is right around the corner, you know that the light is at the end of the tunnel. I think it's phenomenal. You know, the NBA and NHL might be back. I'm hearing that the NHL, there's different cities that are looking to host a playoff format, a Stanley Cup playoff format, so maybe that's a possibility. At Major League Baseball, they might be coming back with only games played in 2 states, in Arizona and Florida. I'm not really sure how it's going to go. It's kind of looking like it's all a little bit discombobulated. That's quite a word right there.
It's a good word. It's a good word. Discombobulated.
Discombobulated, but it's a good sign that they're discussing it. The owners are discussing it. The commissioners are discussing it. And I think I'm ready to get sports back. I don't know about you, but I've been going through some withdrawals, you know, watching reruns. Like I was watching your Giants, actually. Yesterday had a rerun on Fox, Super Bowl 42, one of the best Super Bowls of all time.
One of the 2 in which the New York Giants defeated the New England Patriots, of course, with Tom Brady as quarterback. Twice we've defeated him, by the way. So let's just keep that in mind and keep a little bit of perspective. But let's also put in perspective that there are challenges for these leagues. If you can't have fans in the stands, Nathan Matoush, then it becomes more difficult to make up some of the revenue, of course, because a lot of the money is made from ticket sales. There are other people who are still set aside who work at these arenas and these stadiums that wouldn't be able to go to work because you don't need to sell concessions and so forth. But at the very least, you do get people at home. You can have some of the advertising revenue on television that will come back into play. And I think it is important to keep in mind that people need a morale boost. They're having few things that they can do now, being stuck at home day in and day out, and at least it will give a little bit of excitement over something that they can do. And then also, of course, sports are critical to the American economy too, so then you would have at least some level of an economic boost, it would seem, from the ad sales and from some of the enthusiasm that we'll be building.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned a lot of great points. I think it has to do a lot, you know, we've listened to a lot of Dr. Fauci lately. It has to do with a lot with testing. And, you know, there was a poll that showed that most fans wouldn't go to sporting events if there wasn't testing. I think we still have a long way to go until we can get crowded stadiums in. We had a clip of President Trump talking about the possibility of sports coming back, saying that he wants to have full stadiums by around August or September, just in time for football season. But I think a lot of it has to do with testing, and a lot of it has to do with, you know, how far along we are with the, you know, coronavirus pandemic. It's looking like we hit a peak, and so, you know, that's a good sign. But
or we're about to, at least.
About to hit a peak, at least. But I think we're a long ways away from having packed stadiums. But I will say the fact that they could have at least something, at least something for the sports fan is awesome. And I'm looking forward to it. They're even going to have a virtual draft. NFL draft. That's probably going to be the most watched draft in NFL history.
You know, I would see that as being a strong possibility, Nathan Matoush, that we could well see this be the most watched draft in history, just because people have been looking for some news out of the sports world, and there's been so little, as you were saying before. There's been reruns galore on ESPN and Fox Sports, everywhere where there's sports. That's all they can do, pretty much, is just play the reruns. Now, I would think NASCAR is a sport that I would see as being able to come back at some point here in the near future, because you, of course, without crowds, because you can have someone driving around fast in these vehicles, and you don't have too much contact that's going on. Although I think the testing, as you point out, is critical, because you need the players to not be infecting other players. You need the players to not be infecting the crew and so forth that will have to be on site for these games and races and all those things to take place.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, hey, NASCAR, that's better than nothing. You know, I've watched a couple NASCAR races. That could get pretty entertaining, especially in the last like 10 laps or so. You could probably put the NASCAR races on pause until, I'd say, about the last hour. But hey,
I don't know.
If NASCAR's on, Yeah, I'm all for it. I love all sports. I'll be able to watch
Yeah,
it.
it's the same thing for my father. He is an all-sports guy. It doesn't matter what the sport is. He will watch it. And as far as NASCAR, he'll watch a race all the way through, not just the last 10 laps. Being someone who enjoys NASCAR, he and my mother went not too long ago to watch a NASCAR race, which, of course, is a fun thing to do, and have those enjoyable experiences. Now, you may not be able to do that in person, but at least you can watch something happening on television. So there you go. At least a little bit of the sports world can come back for the average American, it seems.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you talk about NASCAR because we know, well, this is IndyCar, actually, the Indianapolis 500 coming up here in May. That is about right at the time where we could possibly be at least heading in the direction of getting things back to normal. So maybe the Indy 500, maybe they won't have fans in there yet, but at least we'll be able to watch a full Indianapolis 500.
Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic as producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads day in and day out. Good work, my friend. Thank you, and thanks for joining us today. As always, as we get more and more news trickling out there about the sports world.
That's right. Jimmy, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Once again, Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic as our producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to be with you. Okay, let's shift gears here, and I'm optimistic. I like to see that sports may be coming back so people can at least watch them on TV, even if that's the only thing. Even if you can't go ahead and enjoy what's happening in the sports world yourself in the stands, you can watch it on television, being able to enjoy competition again and watching that. Now, when it comes to the political world, something that came about last week was Joe Biden essentially securing the nomination to be the Democrat candidate as for the President of the United States. And Joe Biden, late last week, in an effort to clearly try and court supporters of Bernie Sanders, unveiled a brand new plan of his own that seems to be very akin to a Bernie plan or to an Elizabeth Warren plan on student loan debt and what he would like to see done about that. Here's a snippet of a live stream that he did, I think it was Thursday evening, where he talked about his new plan that he wants to move forward with, and we'll get into some of the details and why it's so bad here in a moment.
The next package, this is already being discussed, should include student debt relief for at least $10,000 per person, to help ease the burden on young people who are already struggling to get by before the coronavirus. They're not whining, they're just out there saying, hey, look, I busted my neck. That's why the next bill should forgive a minimum of $10,000 of student debt for everybody with a debt when they pass this bill, just right off the bat. Keeping the positions when we come out of this, they're not further in the hole, that they're not so deep in the hole that they've been put into.
So I understand the challenges of student loan debt. To be sure, I still have about $15,000 in student loan debt. I've been very open and candid about that. I graduated from Regis University, a private school, in 2011. I was able to get out a year early and work some other angles to keep my debt load down. I'm now, I think, more than halfway through my debt burden that I had graduated with. But I still have $15,000 in student loan debt, and so I certainly understand the gravity of the situation. It is a challenge to pay back your debt and keep pace with the interest. That's what's been the biggest challenge for me, as it is for so many young people, is being able to keep up with the interest payments that are required without having that add significant amounts to your student loan debt burden. So Joe Biden puts forward this plan to try and help those who are deeply indebted with student loan debt, which I think is absolutely critical to keep in mind. There are a lot of Republicans and conservatives who poo-poo the issue, who say, we shouldn't worry about that. And they say we shouldn't worry about that because young people took out the loans and they should have known what was going on when they did so. They should have known that you couldn't declare student loan debt in bankruptcy. They should have known that you needed to take out this debt and should have tried to minimize it as much as you could. Okay, fair enough. But at the same time, in order to go to school in America today, you virtually have to take out some student loans. The cost has gone up dramatically in the past 30 plus years of a college education. It is now nearly $40,000 per student in tuition in order to go to one of these schools. a year. And it is, it is about $40,000 that you're graduating with in student loan debt, I should clarify. It really varies on the school for what the cost is going to be. So it's when you graduate, it's nearly $40,000 that you're graduating in the debt burden. So that is a tremendous amount, and it does hold back purchasing homes. It holds back starting families. It holds back a lot of things that young people are not moving forward with, trying to take advantage of in their lives to move on. And now we're hit with this economic malaise, and it's a punch right into the gut for young people who've been trying to pay back their debt. But here is something important to keep in mind as we talk about Joe Biden's plan. And that is, the research shows, I think, quite definitively that the federal student loan system is the reason why, the way it is structured, the way our student loan system is structured, is the reason why student loan debt has gone so high. I want to quote Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, in a speech that she gave in 2018 to the Federal Student Aid Training Conference. She said, quote, "It took 42 years, 1965 until 2007, for the student loan balance to grow to $500 billion. It took only 6 years for the loan balance to double to $1 trillion in 2013. That's 1/7 the amount of time it took to get to $500 billion. And today, only 5 years later, FSA holds nearly $1.5 trillion in outstanding loans. In fact, on the federal balance sheet, student loan debt is the single most significant line item. That is dramatic. In 2008, the Bush administration and the Democratic Congress approved something called the Ensuring Continued Access to Student Loans Act. This basically began the nationalization of student loans, and it got worse in 2010 with the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. Directly tied to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, this particular bill really led to direct lending from the federal government for student loans. We had seen dramatic increases in student loan debt over this period of time. So we got to $500 billion in 2007, and now we are at more than $1.6 trillion. That's because the way in which the federal loan system has been set up, and we'll talk about this in greater depth in the coming days and weeks, but the student loan system has been set up in such a way where I would argue it is more difficult to get into school than it is to get a student loan. The system has been structured in a way where colleges and universities are guaranteed the money up front. These institutions will get it no matter what. And so what do they do when the money's going to keep flowing because the federal government has been giving out student aid and even nationalized the system under President Obama? These institutions look at it and say, hey, it's free money. Let's keep raising the tuition. It doesn't matter what the students are going to school for, what their degree is. They could go for underwater basket weaving. And the higher ed institution is going to say, okay, that's fine. That's what you want to study for your major. Doesn't matter if you're not going to be able to get a degree with that major. But instead, you're at least going to be able to go to school, and yeah, you'll come out with the debt load. But hey, we're going to get the money up front no matter what, and we don't have any incentive to hold down the cost, particularly because here in America, it is virtually impossible to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. The only form of consumer debt that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy is student loan debt. Let that sink in for a moment. $1.6 trillion in student loan debt is out there right now, outstanding, and you cannot discharge it if you are deeply, deeply in debt and you find no way out. Now, this is something that was built up over time from the 1970s on to 2005 when it was solidified by the United States Congress. But the biggest problem with this is not just that the students or the borrowers can't discharge debt if you're so deeply in debt and you can't really pay back your loans, that the only other option is that you will default on your loans. The biggest problem with this is actually that there is no risk to the lender. Because if you suspect that maybe, just maybe, your borrower, could end up going bankrupt and discharging their student loan debt in bankruptcy, you're going to be smarter. You're going to be more targeted in the loans that you're giving out. Instead, there's no risk to the lender. And because the colleges and universities have no skin in the game, they will feel comfortable just jacking up the price of college. So what I would do, one of the things that I would do, and then we'll get to Joe Biden's plan in just a second here, is I would enable borrowers to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy, once again. And also, it's important to make sure that the institutions are on the hook. So college and university, put them on the hook for a percentage of the losses in bankruptcy. If you go to a college, you graduate, and then you go onto the job market, and you end up declaring discharging your debt in bankruptcy, that institution should be on the hook. Your college should be on the hook for a percentage of the losses. Same if you are defaulting. If you default on your debt, 15, 20%, whatever it is, that should have to be paid back by the college or university, meaning they will have some skin in the game, some incentive to try and hold down costs. Also, there are bills like the Student Loan Repayment Acceleration Act from Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. You've also got the student loan, the name of the bill is escaping me from the Employer Participation in Repayment Act is a bipartisan bill that's been making headway in Congress. And these two pieces of legislation would basically make it so that employers could provide tax-free support for their workers in paying back loans. That's a significant improvement, because what you've got in a situation like this is where an employer is able to provide support and that employee is working for it. It's not just that they're entitled. They're not just getting a handout. They're actually working and getting some benefit. I've talked with young people who have said, college graduates, in fact, a recent graduate told me she got 6 figures in debt from her undergraduate degree, now almost a year out of college. And she told me, I would love that kind of bill. Even before I would want to pay into a retirement plan that my employer offers, I would want to pay down my student loan debt. I like the tax-free idea. A lot of employers are clamoring for tax-free capabilities here because they know that there are a lot of millennials and Gen Zers who are looking for employers that will provide support in paying down their student loan debt. It's a great way to do it where you're working for it, so it's a benefit, but at the same time, you're getting tax benefits too. Win-win-win when you're talking about that, as well as talking about restoring bankruptcy protection. But Joe Biden's plan is a different story. Joe Biden would forgive all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from 2- and 4-year public colleges and universities for borrowers who earn less than $125,000 a year. That is a lot of Americans who would benefit from this type of big government program of just saying, we're going to clean the slate on $10,000, up to $10,000 in student loan debt. When it gets to the government paying, for example, the federal government would make your monthly federal student loan payments until your student loan debt is paid off. Those are two big things that the Biden plan would do, is basically say, we're going to forgive significant amounts of student loan debt. We heard the clip. Let's hear it one more time so that we can hear Joe Biden himself explain exactly what his policy proposal is.
The next package, this is already being discussed, should include student debt relief for at least $10,000 per person to help ease the burden on young people who are already struggling to get by before the coronavirus. They're not whining. They're just out there saying, hey, look, I busted my neck. That's why the next bill should forgive a minimum of $10,000 of student debt for everybody with a debt when they pass this bill.
Cancel at least $10,000 of student debt per person. If you earn less than $25,000 a year under Biden's plan, you'd make no federal student loan payments and no interest would accrue on your student loans. And also, if you earn more than $25,000 per year, you'd pay no more than 5% of your discretionary income toward federal student loan payments. And again, wanting to cancel at least $10,000 of student loan debt. Now, this may sound nice in theory, but the problem is that it doesn't take into account the underlying structure in the way in which the system is already set up and has been for decades when it comes to student loan debt and how it's actually set up. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But the way that the system is structured is warped. It creates a problematic incentive structure, and this proposal would only make things worse by saying we'll just cancel the debt without dealing with the underlying challenges. Moreover, you diminish the role of personal responsibility. That is to say that somebody who took out student debt themselves, you diminish their responsibility to pay it back. And you also have significant increase in taxpayer costs. What would President Biden do in order to fund this? He'd repeal the high-income excess business losses tax cut that's included in the CARES Act. In other words, a tax cut to help with business losses would be repealed. A crisis policy with businesses? He would repeal that from the CARES Act and then fund it. How? New money? Like, we're talking about a bill that this administration of a Biden administration would be putting forward using funds that come from a temporary package. That doesn't make sense. You cannot fund something like this that would be billions and billions of dollars in this way. It's important to keep in mind the monetary aspect, but also the personal responsibility aspect and the incentive structure. That is to say, it would actually worsen the student loan crisis as opposed to improving it. I've done a lot of research on this. You've seen some videos, perhaps in our videos that we have run, where I've talked about this in greater depth as well. We will, in the coming days and weeks, have a greater wide-scale discussion on student loan debt and this crisis. But I think Biden's approach is the wrong way and would make things worse, not better. All right, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Looking forward to talking with one of the executive directors of a new Heritage Foundation commission on the coronavirus pandemic and crisis and how we're dealing with it as a country, how we should deal with it as a country. We've got more coming up this week. Thanks so much for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Appreciate our partners, the Washington Examiner, great producer, Nathan Matoush working the Matoush magic, and everybody else involved in helping to make this possible. Happy belated Easter, happy Passover, and as always, may God bless America.